Hey everybody, Joel Hoffman here, ready to add another module to my training on Excel for all of you out there. So this is going to be just an introduction. All of these classes have been introductions, and this is an introduction to pivot tables and pivot charts, an incredibly fast way of seeing summaries of large data tables and being able to manipulate the summary quickly and see the results and changes you make. So we're going to talk about pivot tables and pivot charts. So let's do that now. I'm on a blank spreadsheet. I'm going to start in cell B2. And I'm going to build a little data table. So I'd like you all to build this data table with me. And all this data table is going to do is track a family's expenditures. Okay, so very simple. You could do this with anything. An employee's sales results, hours worked, days sick. I mean, you could do anything with a table and then summarize it quickly with a pivot. So in cell B2, we're going to have the date. In cell C2, I'm going to have who is actually spending the money, so the buyer. And then in cell D2, I'm going to put what type of thing they're buying. I'm not going to get down to the detail, you know, Heinz ketchup or Hershey's candy bar or whatever. Just broad categories. And then what it costs. I'm going to have an amount column. Okay, so let's just enter a few bits of data here. I'm going to start with maybe January 1st of 2020. And mom on that day bought some fuel for the car. She filled up the car. And in today's world in California, that might run 74 bucks, depending on the car type. So let's look at these first few cells real quick. Get them formatted kind of the way you like. I don't like the full year here. I know it's 2020, but all I need is the 20, the last two digits. So you might remember, we can come up here to the middle of the ribbon when we have the Home tab selected on the menu bar. Come up to the ribbon. We can see if the format we want is in this quick formatting list. It is not. I want an even shorter date. I just want 20 on the end. So I'm going to go to more number formats. And I'm going to find, there it is right there, I think. Yep, and that's the sample, what I'm looking for. I'm going to select a date with only the last two digits. There's the format I selected. I also want that amount to have a dollar sign on it. Make sure it doesn't have any decimal places. I'm not interested in decimals, just extra work for this table. So I'm going to go up again to the ribbon, and I'm going to pick currency, the dollar sign, and format that cell as currency. So the dollar sign shows up. I don't want the decimal places, so I'm going to decrease the decimal using the button to do that on the formatting portion of the ribbon. So I'll decrease the decimal a couple of times. Yeah, that looks good. Excellent. So I'm going to put in another date. Let's go with maybe January 15th. Mom again. Uh-oh. I'm going to have to expand column B because right now the width does not show the date as I entered it. So I'm going to expand that a little bit. My formatting has not gone down to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these four cells that I've typed in. I'm going to copy. So this is interesting. I'm going to Control C or copy, Control C. And then I'm going to down across just a ton of cells. I want this particular format in all of these cells that you see I've selected here. So I'm going to right click on my mouse. Those of you with Macs, I think it's control click, but for PCs you can right click on your mouse. And I'm going to paste only the format. I don't want the numbers. I just want the format. There it is. So the fifth little icon on the paste options menu there that opened up is just to paste formatting. So I'm going to select that, and we should be good to go. So what did Mom buy on January 15th? She bought some food, some groceries at the store, and she paid $235. Now it's important, when I put in the $235, I did not have to put the dollar sign because I pre-formatted all those cells by what we just did as currency. So when I enter something, it automatically puts the dollar sign in for me. Okay, let's put a few more things in here. On January 17th, Dad spent some money on sports. We don't know what that is. It could be clothes, it could be tickets, it could be a lot of things, but we're just going to say sports right now and say that he spent 20 bucks. Okay, let's do a couple more rows of data. On 121, maybe the daughter, Kelly, spent some money on books. Not sure if that was for personal use or maybe it was school, but general category of books, she spent 125 bucks. Let's get one more thing in here. Maybe February 2nd, Mom again spent some more money on food, and she spent $235. Okay. Now you might have seen some of my other videos. It's real handy to let Excel know that you're working with a table of data. So I'm going to click in this data. It doesn't matter where. I've got 5 rows of data. I've got a header column with this table. And I'm going to make sure that Excel knows this is a table of data, and Excel will automatically give me some neat options around a table of data. Remember, our goal here is to get to pivot tables and pivot charts. We're not there yet. We're just making this table understood by Excel to be a table of data. All right, so on the Home tab of the menu bar, so the Home ribbon, right in the middle, you should see a Format as Table button. So I'm going to click on that. And it gives me some neat options, lighter colors, medium colors, darker colors. I'm going to go with some light colors. I like this because it kind of gives a bold blue background to the header bar on the table. So I'm going to just select that. You can pick any of them. So Excel says, all right, I see you're inserting a table. Is this area that I'm surrounding with dashes, is that the table you want? If we look down here in this little window, it says Format as Table is the name of this window, and it says it's selected B2 through E7 as the area for our table, and it has checked the box saying that our table has headers, which it does. So we want that box checked. Looks good to me. Let's say okay. And bam, we have a table designated by Excel as such. All right. You know, I kind of like some coloring across those rows. So I'm going to go back you'll notice that when we've clicked inside the table, up on the menu bar, we have gotten an extra option for Table Tools Design. Okay, when that comes up, we now have a ribbon relative to things we can do with our table. All right, so I want that multicolor by row look. So what I did was I can click and see all these things again. And I didn't want this without the coloring across each row. I'm going to pick this one. Blue, dark blue header row, but light blue every other row, because that kind of helps my eyes track across. I'm going to select that. Some other things just before we move off of this table issue, we're going to go on to pivots. If you've clicked in the table, I highly recommend that you name this table, because if you create more than one table in this workbook that you're building, you could have tables for all kind of other stuff that Mom and Dad and Kelly do. When you reference tables and formulas and whatnot, it helps to see the name of the table you're referencing in the formulas, so you're sure that you're going to get data from where you think you're going to get it. So if you'll notice, I'm clicked inside this table, so the Design tab appears on the menu bar, and I get a ribbon for Design. And at the far left of that ribbon, it says Table Name. Right now, it just has this generic Table 2. All right, I want to name this. Now, there's some naming conventions you have to use. Excel does not like spaces or special characters for this. So we need to come up with a name. I'm gonna get rid of that Table 2, and I'm just going to let's make it FAM. I'm going to capitalize the F, FAM Spend. All right, I'm going to capitalize the F and the S. No spaces, no dashes, no underscores. Just call it FAM Spend. So that'll help me in my mind know that this table has to do with spending that the family's doing. Table 2, the name Table 2, you know, that wouldn't help me at all know what I was referencing in any formulas. But FAM Spend, that has it covered for me. Maybe you came up with a different name. Another thing you might want to take a look at is in this design, table design ribbon, there's an option to have a total row. Okay, if I select that, Excel automatically puts in a total row at the bottom. And if you look at the formula that is doing the total, I'm going to click on that cell. Excel has actually put in something other than maybe what you would think. You would think maybe Excel would put the sum function here, but it has not. It has put in the subtotal function. All right. Just a cool little trick you might want to be aware of. When you are looking at a cell with a formula in it. So right now I am clicked on cell E8 where Excel has automatically put in a subtotal formula. I can see that because up in the formula bar, it says equals subtotal 109 amount. Be aware, Excel has put a subtotal in that column. Subtotal will change based on how you filter your table. So you've got to know that subtotal is a little different from sum. Be aware of that. But anyway, with a cell selected, like I have here now, I've selected cell E8. I see the little box, the little selector box around it. You can hit the function key F2. I'm not sure what it is on Macs, but you can do a quick Google search on, what is the F2 key from a PC keyboard? What is it on a Mac? And you'll find it instantly. I should have done that before I recorded this and have it ready for you. My apologies. But if I hit the function key, not the F key and 2, but the function key at the top of the keyboard, so, I'm going to hit F2, I now see the formula in the cell that I've selected, and I can edit it here without having to go up and edit it in the formula bar. The really cool thing is I can actually use my arrow keys to bounce around inside this formula. If you have worked with Excel much and you're trying to edit a formula, sometimes when you hit the arrow keys right or left, Excel assumes you want to arrow right or left in the worksheet, and it starts inputting cell references in your formula that you don't want. You just wanted to move right or left. So be aware the F2 key, when you've selected a formula cell, will bring up the formula in that cell where you can then use the arrow keys to edit the formula. And sometimes that's handy because as you can see on your screens, I surely can see the formula better here than I do up in the formula bar. Okay, so let's see. For some reason, I'm also watching what you're seeing on the screen with my iPhone, and I see right now that you're not seeing the ribbon. Let's see, why are you not seeing that? Let me try something different with this share option. I'm going to use screen 2 and share. Okay, there we go. Make this a little bigger. Good. Oops, too high. Need a little lower. Okay. Perfect. I think you guys can see that now. Might bring this down just a tad more. There we go. Okay, so now you can see my menu bar and the bottom of this spreadsheet as well. So before, when I was talking about different ribbons, remember those are just accessed by the tabs across the menu bar. So as you see, as you click across these tabs, you'll see that the ribbon changes. And when you click inside the table, you'll get this extra table tools tab on that menu bar that when you click on gives you table relative commands on the ribbon. Okay, so I'm going to now uncheck the total row from the design tools on the design ribbon. So I'm left with just this table that we formatted dark along the headers and alternating colors along the rows to help my eyes kind of track. I'm going to shrink column A just a bit so that I know it's there. I like having an extra row or column top and side when I'm doing work in spreadsheets, just because I know The way I work, I'm going to probably want to put something there. So it just a personal preference the way I do that. So I'm going to shrink one a little bit as well, the row. Okay. So we've named this. Again, if you're clicked in the table and you have the design ribbon available, you'll notice way over on the left side of that ribbon, you can change the table name. I have mine named FAM Spend. Okay. So let's go back to the Insert tab on the menu bar. I'm going to click on Insert on the menu bar, and I get the Insert ribbon at that point. Over on the very far left, there is a button that says Pivot Table. We're going to insert a pivot table into this spreadsheet. So I'm going to click Pivot Table. Now, because I clicked inside the table, the FAM Spend table, and I'm inserting now a pivot table, Excel makes the correct assumption that the data I want this pivot table linked to is the FAM Spend table of data. So it shows that in this Create Pivot table that I'm moving around on your screen. The option Select a Table or Range is selected, and Excel has correctly put in the name of the table we want this pivot connected to, FAM Spend. Now, the next option, you can do either way, but let's talk about it. Choose where you want the pivot table to be. Well, right now the option is selected to put it into a new worksheet. That can be handy sometimes. I often do that. For the purposes of this class, though, I want the pivot table up at the same time we're looking at the data table, FAM Spend. Okay? So I'm going to tell Excel the other option. I want this pivot to be put into the existing worksheet, the one I'm looking at now with the FAM Spend data in it. All right. And so Excel wants me to know, me to tell it what cell on this worksheet do you want the brand new pivot table to be at. So I'm looking at cell G3 or G2 maybe. So I click into the location option of that Create Pivot Table window. And I'm going to go up and click in my worksheet where I want Excel to insert this pivot table. So I want it in G2. I'm going to click in G2. And see, I didn't know how to type all that stuff in. Excel has sheet 2, exclamation mark, $, you know, so it's easier just to click where you want the pivot to be rather than try to type that all out from memory. All right, this data model thing is an advanced Excel feature, so that should be unchecked. So we've got the FAM Spend table selected as the source for this pivot table. And we've got an existing worksheet location, cell G2, in our current worksheet as the place to put this pivot table. So that all looks good. I'm going to hit OK. Now, Excel, I'm going to shrink down column F. I want that spacing between the data and the pivot. So I have a blank column there, but I shrink it down a little bit so it all appears on the field and something on the spreadsheet. And something else that you've noticed, there is a new called a field list table or window that opened up on the right-hand side of your spreadsheet. And this is kind of like the control central of this pivot table. And you can play with this. You're not you're not touching your data when you're playing with this pivot table. So feel free to, we're going to do some things, but feel free after this class to just play with pivot tables. You can even delete them. You're not deleting your data. You're just summarizing it, and you can play around and see a zillion different ways to summarize your data. So let's add some of our data to this a little bit at a time and see what the pivot table does in response. All right. So going over to the field list, all right, not in the worksheet where you see pivot table 1, which, by the way, let's go ahead and change the name of that too. Pivot table 1 doesn't tell us anything. So you'll notice, because we're in the pivot table with our cursor, another couple options have been added to the menu bar under pivot table tools. All right, there's an analyze and a design. And so if you're on the analyze tab, at the far left of the ribbon is the pivot name field, where we can change the name of our pivot table. So I'm dreaming up names here. You come up with names that work for you and make sense and tell you something about the pivot table you're working with. I'm going to call this Mom, Dad, Kelly, MDK pivot, P-I-V-O-T. Okay, MDK pivot. So Mom, Dad, Kelly, pivot. All right, that's going to be the name of my pivot table. So when I hit enter after putting that name in, now you can see the pivot table has the name MDK pivot. So good thing to name tables, name pivot tables, and pivot charts, so that you have some extra descriptive wording in the name to remind you what this table or this chart is based on, where it's from, whatever. Okay, so we're in the pivot table area. I've clicked in the pivot table area, and this pivot table field list has appeared on the right-hand side. The columns of our data table are here: date, buyer, type, amount. Down below that, you'll see some boxes. We're gonna play with those in a little bit, but there's a box for values, columns, rows, filters. So those boxes, whatever we're gonna put these fields, these column names down in these boxes, and whatever we do there is going to change how the pivot table looks and how it acts. Okay, so for example, let's take the amount column or the amount field, and we could just check the box next to amount, but I want you to see something else you can do. That kind of is obvious, clicking the box. But when you mouse over amount, it changes color to show that that's the field or column that if you click right now, you would be selecting. You can move up and down that list. You can see that the color changes for each column that you mouse over in that list. So I'm going to mouse over amount, and I'm going to left click and hold it and drag that down into the values box. Okay. All right. So wow, all of a sudden, we now see something else instead of that blank pivot we saw before. Because we chose amount and put it down into the values portion of this pivot control area, Excel made an assumption that we want to sum the amount column, and it did that, $689. All right. Again, I want those dollars. I want the currency. I want currency format for those. So I'm going to change that format. You can remember, so let me review something that you'll hear me say in all my videos. I'm going to do things here one way in this little training video. Some of you who already know Excel might be thinking to yourself, man, there's a far easier way to do that. Could be. Or you might be thinking, that's the wrong way to do that. Well, for you, could be. So you'll do you on your spreadsheets. I'm just going to show you the way I'm most comfortable with in modifying and editing the look and feel of Excel. But you're absolutely right, those of you thinking that. There are multiple ways to get things done in Excel. And I think what everybody does, they land on a way of doing things that is most comfortable, that makes more sense, most sense to the way their brain thinks. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So here's what I'm going to do to set the currency format to this sum of amount. I'm going to go down over here into the field list where we drug that amount down into the values box, and you'll notice there's a little drop down arrow next to sum of amount there. I'm going to hit that little drop down arrow and I get a menu of things I can do to that field in the pivot table. And down at the bottom of this little menu is value field settings. I hope you might not see that on your screens, but I see that you at least see the menu opened up. If you'll go down to the bottom of that menu, you'll see value field settings. I'm going to select that. And up pops a new window that gives me options on what I want done to that field, that column in the pivot table. Well, first of all, I don't like the name of it, sum of amount. I'm going to call that total spent. So where it says custom name, I'm going to say total spent and replace sum of amount with total spent. I also want it to be currency. So if you'll notice, Excel gives me the option, rather than summing that column, I could count it, average it. I have other options on how to summarize that column of data. Sum is what I want though, so let's stick with that. Down at the bottom left of this little window is a button that says number format. Hey, that's what I was looking for. I want to change the number format to currency. So I click on that, and I'm going to click on the currency option in the window that then opens up for formatting cells. I don't want decimals, so I'm going to get rid of the 2 decimals by clicking the down arrow next to that box that gives me the choice of how many decimal places I want to see. So I could change it to when it's negative, make it red or have quotes around it or whatever, but I just want it to show me the amount and no decimals, and be currency. So I want to see that $sign. So it looks good. I'm going to say okay and okay. And now my total spent pivot field shows $689. So what did Excel do in this pivot table? It immediately figured out what's the sum of all the amounts spent in my data table. And you might be thinking, well, you could have done that with a total row just by selecting total row. True. Many different ways to do things in Excel, but the pivot table lets us take it even further. Okay. So now in the pivot table, let's put the name of the person as a row. Okay. So I'm going to come over to the pivot table field. I'm going to click and drag buyer down to the rows control of the pivot table. We'll let go. And look what the pivot table has now done. It has summarized what Dad's total spend is, what Kelly's total spend is, and what Mom's total spend is. You'll notice Mom has 3 rows over there, and it correctly summed up all of Mom's values as 544. All right, so we still have the same grand total. We've just been able to just instantly summarize by person. Okay, so let's play with this just a little bit. You've got to understand some things with pivot tables. Let's say we were going to add some more data to our pivot table, or pardon me, our data table. So we come over here. I'm going to go over to cell B8. You notice when I clicked outside of the pivot table, all that pivot field list control stuff went away. I'm no longer in the pivot table, so why would it show me the controls for the pivot table? If I click back in, bam, the field list comes back up. Okay? So I'm going to go down underneath the last row of data that I entered for who's spending what in our data table. And I'm going to say on 2/12, Kelly spent some money on music. Maybe it was downloads, maybe it was a subscription to Spotify, who knows, but she spent some money that we're going to categorize as music. And I'm going to just say she spent $38. Now, a couple things to watch here. Kelly over in the pivot table is summarized as having already spent a total of $125. All right. You might think that if Excel does what we want it to, that 125 will now update to include the $38 she spent on music. That would make sense. But pivot tables don't work that way. You got to understand that. All right, so I'm going to hit enter after I put in $38 for Kelly. And sure enough, when I hit 38, it formatted it as currency. We did that earlier. But the pivot table, look at this, still shows 125 for her total when we know it isn't. So what happened? Let's see, I remember Joel telling me in class that if I hit the F9 key, the function 9 key, it'll recalculate. Maybe that's what I need to do. So I hit F9, nothing. The pivot's still showing 125. So pivot tables, got to understand this, obviously. Pivot tables take a copy of the table and move that copy into memory. And then it's just working and doing what you ask it to do in memory. It's up here in memory. A different part of memory, okay, just for the pivot table. So if I go out here and I change data, the copy that is up in Excel's special place for pivot table work is not updated. It doesn't know, it doesn't, you would think it would. And in the advanced class I teach, there's ways to actually get into the programming and make it do that. But, you know, it's beyond the scope of this introduction to pivot tables. So what do we do to get this updated? Well, if you have a cell selected in the data table, you can right-click in the data table and you'll get a menu. One of the options on the menu is to refresh the pivot table. That's what you have to do. Whenever you want to be working with the latest data in your pivot table, you got to remember to refresh the pivot. All right. The pivot will be refreshed unless you've got it set otherwise, but the default is to refresh the pivot when you open up the spreadsheet, the workbook. So you're good to go when you get in there. But if you ever, if you're ever going to send this information on to a boss or to a board of directors, whatever you're using it for, a club organization, whatever, highly recommend just go in and refresh the pivot before you submit it to anywhere, or use the data anyway. Refresh the pivot. It'll go grab a new copy of what's in the data table, and you're good to go. Okay, so we're going to hit refresh. Let's see what happens to Kelly's total then. I click, bam, Kelly's been updated to 163, and the grand total too is updated to 727. Okay, so let me just check something real quick here. All right, so when we click over again in the data table, let's walk through this so we understand what just happened. The pivot field list goes away. I'm going to add a new row of data, maybe on 223. Dad went out and bought some tickets to something, maybe a concert, I don't know. And he spent, wow, $450 on tickets. We hit enter. We know now the pivot table will not be updated, and it sure isn't. It shows Dad at 20 bucks, but we know he just spent 450. So we right click inside the pivot table area. We click on refresh, and now the totals are updated to show that new $450 ticket spread. Okay, so let's try something else here. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to add some columns in here. All right. So I want to drag the date. So here's where I want to go with this. I want to see what Dad, Kelly, and Mom spend by month. All right, so I'm going to have this neat pivot table that breaks out what they spend by, by total spend, but then what months they have these expenditures in. All right, so imagine how powerful this could be. You could have 10,000 rows of data here and now just have it down to Dad, Kelly, and Mom on the rows and what their spend is by month. Okay, amazing. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to drag the date down into the columns portion of the pivot controls. So click and drag date down into the columns box. Something really cool is going to happen here. Not only did Excel drag date, remember, in date's explicit. I mean, it's by day, January 15th, February 2nd, February 23rd. It also created another field called months. Excel can assume, man, by day would sure be a lot of data. How about I give him the option to just do it by month? And sure enough, I mean, that just makes sense. It gives us a little something to work with. So we now have months and date over here in our pivot table. I'm going to drag the spreadsheet over a little bit so that on the table, on the screen, you guys see what I have. So it moves the data table off the left side a little bit, but now you can see what my pivot looks like. And look at, there's a lot of things here to take note of. Excel has already assumed that we want these columns by month. So all it is showing January and February and a grand total. But that's pretty cool. We can see Dad's total spend in January was 20, in February 450. We can see Mom's by month. But notice we have this little plus sign next to the month. If I click on that little plus sign, it expands January out to show me all the days that money was spent and the summary of what each person spent on those days. So if Mom, Dad, and Kelly went out on the same day and spent a bunch of money, I'd see that summarized right here. Or next to the month now is a minus sign. I can click on that and it summarizes it only by the month again. So I can split it out and look at the detail, or I can keep it at the month level. I can do the same thing with February. Click on the plus, see the spend by day, February 2nd, 12th, and 23rd, or I can click on the minus sign again and collapse that month's data into just a month's summary. Okay, so wow, you've seen quite a bit here. Let's add some data for March and see what that looks like. So I'm going to drag my worksheet back over so that I can see and add data for March. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to type in, on March 4th, Kelly went out and actually bought some food. She spent $23. All right. Remember, what do we have to do? It's not over here yet in the pivot table. So I right click in the pivot table and then select refresh on the resulting menu. And if I look at my total pivot table now, I have a March column in my pivot table. I'm going to shrink this just a bit. Column H going to shrink a little bit. Make sure that all stays on the screen for you. So wow, some powerful stuff. Picture salespeople, and you could get a list of every salesperson, their volume for every month, get totals for the year, and anytime you wanted to break out the detail for any one month, you can just click on that month and make that happen. Powerful stuff. Pivot tables, incredible. Okay, so I want to see this data graphically on a chart. A lot of times, that really helps understand numbers and data that we're looking at. So again, I'm going to click in my data table, and I'm going to go to the Insert tab on my menu bar and click Insert. One of the things that Excel says I can insert about the middle of the ribbon is a pivot chart. You can look, it's given us all kind of sample things you can do, recommended charts, but I want to just click on the down arrow for pivot chart and kind of control those options myself. If we had known we wanted to do a pivot table and a pivot chart at the same time, we're going to go that route anyway. Also in this menu under pivot chart is the option to create both a pivot chart and a pivot table. So that's kind of cool. Let's pick pivot chart now. Again, Excel assumes it's the FAM spend data table that we're wanting to base this chart on. So it's put that in as the selected table correctly. Again, I want to put this chart in the existing worksheet. So I'm going to select that because I want to stay on this worksheet and not jump around between different worksheets to see what's going on. Where do I want to put this? I'm going to put it underneath the pivot table. Maybe I'm going to go to cell G10. So I'm going to click where Excel wants me to type the location for this pivot chart. I clicked in that blank field, and I'm going to click on cell G11, pardon me, G10, so Excel automatically puts in here for the location where I clicked. Not going to add it to the data model. That's more advanced, as we talked about earlier. And I'm going to hit OK. Okay, same kind of thing as before. There's a blank pivot chart screen that we're looking at with what the pivot fields can be based on our pivot table. And check it out, it's already assumed that we probably want months as one of the fields to choose from. That's pretty cool. Excel, if you tell Excel you're working with a data table, that's the kind of stuff Excel will do. It'll make some great assumptions and save you some work. So let's play with this a little bit. I want the amount to be down here as the value. That makes sense. And this chart is just way too big to be looking at, and it's current. So I'm going to grab the corner of the chart and make it so we can see it a little better. Okay, so here's this neat little chart we're building. Total spend is whatever that is, $1,200, right? That doesn't tell us a whole bunch. But let's now put in, like we did before, let's put in the buyers as the categories. We'll see where this goes on the chart. We can move it around. Remember, we just click and drag, we can play. We're not fooling with our data. So let's click and drag the buyer down into the categories box of the pivot chart controls. Cool. So now on this chart, we see Dad, Kelly, and Mom graphed. Looks like Mom's spending quite a bit more than Kelly and Dad, maybe. See if I can move that up just a little bit. Yep. Somehow I'd like to get a graph that shows months and Dad, Kelly, Mom. So let's see what happens if we drag months down into the legend, the other control box. Months down into the legend. Oh, cool. This is one way to look at this data. So Dad, Kelly, and Mom are still the categories along the x-axis of this chart we've created. And the bars are colored by month. So only Kelly has spent money in March, so there's only one bar there in March. What would happen if we put months on the x-axis and Dad, Kelly, and Mom as the legend? This could get interesting. We can play. It's a pivot chart. We can play with it. We're not fooling with our data. We can always hit undo if we mess up our chart in some way we didn't know what we did. So I'm gonna flip these around. I'm gonna take months and put them as categories, and then I'm gonna take buyer and put it as the legend. Watch this. All right, so on your screen, I'm going to click and drag months from the legend control box and drag it down into the axis box. The chart looks stupid. Don't worry. It's going to get better. Now I'm going to take the buyer field from the axis box and move it over to the legend box. So this is a little different look. We now have the month along the x-axis of the chart, and we have the buyer color-coded. So now we're looking at this very quick. You see how quickly we did that? We now have a chart that gives us every month and columns that show us who the buyer was that month. All right. Wow. Let's look at another way to plot this data. All right. We can change the chart type. I want this month to be just one bar. And then the bar color-coded in its pieces by who the buyer was. let's see how we might do that. So I'm going to right click on the chart and I'm going to change the chart type. Okay, so I right clicked on the chart and I'm selecting change chart type. Okay, so Excel now gives us a list of possible chart types to select from. All right, well, it gives us pictures of where we're going. So right now, if you'll look, it's selected right now what's called a clustered column. That's what we have displayed. But I'm going to try this stacked column. Okay. Now there's 100%, so this is a percentage. It's kind of a neat way to look at it, but I want the actual values plotted. So I'm going to try a stacked column. Cool. I can mouse over what's going to happen if I do. That looks really neat. I'm going to say okay. And now my chart shows each month's total spend broken out by the person who did the spending. Powerful stuff. And so, I mean, you can change it just quickly without any difficulty. It's amazing. All right. So let's do one more thing with this pivot table data. We're going to talk a little bit about filtering what we're looking at. So right here, if we wanted to, you'll notice there's a drop-down arrow over buyer on this chart. If we click on that, maybe we just want to see dad. Okay, dad's spend by month. Or maybe we want to just see dad and mom and leave out Kelly. All right, so we can filter right on the screen, right on the chart, who we're looking at. Or we can go back and select all and see everything that we've got in our data table in this chart. But there's also one thing we're not looking at right here. We're not looking at the type of expenditure being made. So maybe we don't want to see type on this chart, but we want to filter by type on this chart. So let's see what that would look like. All right. So I've been trying to keep all these tables and data and stuff all on this one worksheet, and you can see it's starting to get kind of cluttered. So I'm going to move things out. When you do pivot tables and pivot charts, you should have the table and the chart in its own set of columns. There really shouldn't be anything over the top of it. Like right now, I have my chart over the data table and over the first pivot table we made. So I'm covering the data table and the pivot table we originally started with. It's better to just keep things separated in their own set of columns. So I'm going to move the pivot chart and its associated pivot table out a ways. All right, and I'm going to also do something else because I'll talk about that when I get there. But so I'm just going to click and drag this pivot chart out a ways. That went a little too far. So, and I'm going to drop it down. So I'm going to put it around cell M4, and I'll explain why. When we do some filtering, there's going to be something that appears above this chart, and I want room for it. I'm also going to go back and get the associated data table that was created for this chart. It's below the original right here. I've got it in cell G10. It's going to be created when you create a pivot chart. The nice thing about having a pivot table for itself and then a pivot chart with its associated table is that you can see both. You can summarize in the pivot table and print summaries of rows and columns with data and numbers, or you can work in the pivot chart and the associated pivot table to that chart and change the look of the chart And as you do that, it's going to change the look of the associated pivot table. The pivot table and the pivot chart are going to be linked together when you create a pivot chart. So we're ending up with two pivot tables. One was just to show you what pivot tables look like and work with that. We created a second one when we created a pivot chart, and then those two work together to present data in chart format. So I'm going to move everything off, kind of get it in its own column. So I'm selecting this pivot table that was created with the pivot chart. I'm going to also move it way out to the right of everything we've created. Drop it down a little bit so that there's some room at the top. I'm going to move this pivot chart down a little bit. Okay, so let me expand what I've done here so you can see it all on your screens. So the first thing we did at the far left was create a data table. And then we created a pivot table related to that data, and we summarized it a certain way. We wanted to see rows and columns. Then we created a pivot chart. When we did, Excel created another pivot table for presenting data in that pivot chart. They're connected. Okay, so I've moved those two things out to the right. All four of those things we've done, the data table, the first pivot table, the pivot chart, and its associated pivot table, it's best if you have them in their own columns. Okay, so let's work on this filter thing, and that'll be the last thing we'll cover as far as pivot charts and pivot tables. Really cool feature. So I'm going to zoom back in and get just the pivot chart and its associated pivot table on the screen. All right, so here we are. Good. So I'm going to bring type from the pivot chart field list. And by the way, if for some reason, you're looking on the screen, you've got the pivot table or the pivot chart selected, and you accidentally get rid of this field list, okay? So the pivot chart field list is over here where we control how the pivot chart looks like. I could hit the X button here and make that field list go away. Now, how do I get it back? All right, well, if you're clicked in the pivot chart, you can go up to the menu bar and you'll notice there's pivot chart tools. If you click on Analyze, the Analyze tab there, you'll see that the ribbon changes to Pivot Chart Analyze options, one of which, second from the far right, is Field List. All right, so we'll click on Field List and up pops that field list that we got rid of earlier. So that's how you get the field list back onto the screen. All right, so let's take the type. We haven't added that to our chart yet. Let's take type, drag it down into the filters part of the control for the pivot chart, and you'll see what happened. Up above the pivot table that is used with the pivot chart, there's a new blue box area that says type. Well, we can click right now. We've got our chart and the associated table set to all types. Let's just select food and click OK. And now our chart and the associated data table shows us just food purchases. As we look at the chart, Mom and Kelly are the only ones that have bought food, and we can see which months those expenses happened in on our chart. Kind of cool. We also can see that at the top of the chart, that same selector for type is there as well. So I could have select, maybe I can do that. I'll select fuel from over here. The chart shows just mom bought fuel in January. Okay. Is that true? If we go way back over here, yep, only mom bought fuel and it was in January. That's our data table. So we'll go back, drag this back over. Or we could select multiple items. When we click on that drop down arrow next to type, there's a box that says, do you want to select multiple items? So I say yes by checking that box, and now I can choose multiple options. Maybe I want fuel and food to be plotted. Nothing else, not sports, tickets, music, just fuel and food. I say okay. And now I see that Mom and Kelly are the ones that have bought fuel and food in January, February, March. I see the amounts that they've spent. Okay, so a lot of things to do with pivot tables and pivot charts. You can play with this, drag things around over in the field controls, the field list. When you're clicked on the pivot chart or the pivot table, excuse me, you'll get that field list, drag things around, try stuff out, remove stuff, delete stuff. You can always hit undo. But the power of summarizing by employee, by month, by region, by city, by date, by year, it can just happen instantly on a table of thousands and tens of thousands, millions of cells of data. You can summarize it quickly for exactly what you're looking for. So I hope that's helped. It's a little more advanced than you might think, but I wanted to include it in this introductory class because, and it's the last thing I'm including because you will have, as you go through all of these different introduction courses, you'll have a good foundation knowledge to understand that, hey, there's a lot more out there. And the next place you might want to look at building your power of Excel knowledge and use is at pivot tables and pivot charts. Anyway, that's the end of this class, this video. Thanks for tuning in and joining us, and much success to you all in your use of Excel as a power user.